Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the entire congregation, I welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Shenandoah Valley. We wish to recognize and honor the native tribes who lived in this area on unceded land. The Catawbas, the Shawnee, the Delaware, Cherokees, Susquehannocks, and the Iroquois, who are also known as the Six Nations Tribe. I am David Adams, your worship associate for today's service. We come together each morning, each Sunday, as a community of seekers of what is most important in our lives, seekers of understanding in the face of uncertainty and loss, seekers of forgiveness for our own shortcomings, seekers of gratitude for the unexpected gifts we receive from all around us. We gather in awe of the beauty of nature and the mysteries of the universe. But most importantly, we come together as seekers of a community of love and empowerment, celebrating our search for truth and meaning in our daily lives.
Our opening words this morning come to us by Kathy Huff in Singing the Living Tradition. Spirit of life, be present with us this hour. Join us today as we join together in a wider search for truth and purpose in our daily lives. In this quest, may we greet one another with open hearts and minds. May we inspire each other to consider new questions and seek deeper meanings. May we cultivate wisdom and compassion. Let all who enter this sanctuary, this place of light and love, see a welcome face, hear a kind word, find comfort in this community. And may all that is said here and done here today be in the service of justice and love.
Now, as Dixie comes forward, let us all say together, here and from our homes, the words for lighting our chalice. In the light of truth and in the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, to share. And I invite you to join with us as we say our covenant. Love is the spirit of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom. To these ends, we covenant one with another. And now, please stand in body or spirit as we sing hymn number 90 in our gray hymnal, From All the Fret and Fever of the Day.
Good morning. Our time for all ages this morning is called A Day at the Lawn by Eric Walker Wickstrom. Once upon a time, there was a girl named Wendy. She loved grass. She loved the feel of it between her toes. She loved the smell of it when it was freshly mowed. She loved its bright green color. Wendy loved grass more than just about anything. One day, her family decided to go to the beach. Wendy wasn't too sure about it. "Come on," said her older brother. "We can go swimming. And we can collect rocks and shells together," said her mom. "And you can bury me in the sand," said her dad. It sounded like fun, so they all piled into the car and off they went. When they got to the beach, it sure looked great, like nothing Wendy had ever seen. But when she first touched the sand, it was way, way, way too hot. "This isn't cool like grass," she said. "I wish this sand was grass," she cried. Now, Wendy had a good luck fairy who followed her around, and he heard her wish and decided to grant it. With a flash, all of the sand turned into grass. "I guess I won't be buried today," said Dad. "That's okay," said Mom. "Let's collect some shells." Everyone went down to where the water lapped the edge of the grass. There were polished rocks and beautiful shells lying all about. They all set to work looking for the shiniest or the biggest or the most colorful. Everyone except Wendy. "Ouch," she said. The rocks and shells hurt her feet. "I wish these rocks were soft like grass," she thought to herself. And as soon as she did, her good luck fairy, who could hear her thoughts as well as her words, made it so. The rocks and shells turned to grass too. The family looked at one another. "Well," they said, "at least they're swimming." "Last one in is a rotten egg," Wendy's older brother cried, and he ran into the waves, followed closely by Wendy's sister, their delighted squeals trailing behind. Wendy followed tentatively, but when her toe touched the water, she said, "Yuck, too wet and cold." This time, she didn't even have to think it. The fairy changed the water into grass without her even having to ask. Everyone turned to her and said, "Wendy." But her family was very understanding. They were, after all, Unitarian Universalists. So they decided to try to make the best of it. "Let's have lunch," said Mom and Dad. So they got out their picnic basket, found a nice spot on the now wide lawn, spread out the checkered cloth, and set to it. Wendy was in heaven. After all, didn't she love grass more than just about anything? But she had to admit she was beginning to feel a bit bored, and something just didn't feel right. "Well," said her mom, "we went to the beach, and we're at a lawn. This isn't the way it's supposed to be." "What do you mean?" Wendy asked. Her dad said, "You made it all the same. The sand, the rocks, the water. Each was different, and you made them the same because their differences made you feel uncomfortable. But those differences also made them special and beautiful. And without them, there's a whole lot missing. In fact, everything that makes this place what it is missing. And that means that you're missing out on everything you really came here for." Wendy thought about this for a while. She did want to collect rocks and shells. She'd seen some really beautiful ones. And the water was cold, but her brother and sister looked like they were having a lot of fun. And the idea of burying her father in sand was too good to pass up. "I wish it was all back the way it was," she thought, and the good luck fairy made her wish come true. Wendy and her family had the best time that day. She still loves grass more than just about anything, but she's learned to love other things too. And she's come across some things that she doesn't like much, and that's okay too. But she's never ever wanted everything to be the same again, because she knows that things are supposed to be different, each thing as it is, and that exploring new things makes life so much more fun.
Please join with me in a time of meditation, spoken at first and followed by a time of silence. Our words of meditation this morning come to us from the poet Wendell Berry. "When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting for their time. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and I am free. So let us open our minds and hearts to that place of quiet, to the silent prayer for the healing of pain and the soft, gentle coming of love. May it be so.
The words for reflection today are from a poem by Cedric Wright called The Life of Trees. Consider the life of trees. Aside from the axe, what trees acquire from humans is inconsiderable. What we may acquire from trees is immeasurable. From their mute forms, there flows a poise in silence, a lovely sound and motion in response to wind. What peace comes to those aware of the voice and bearing of trees? Trees do not scream out for attention. A tree, a rock, has no pretense, only a real growth out of itself in close communion with the universal spirit. It establishes in earth and not only its root system, but also those roots of its beauty and its unknown consciousness. Sometimes one may sense a glisten of that consciousness, and with such perspective, feel that humans are not necessarily the highest forms of life.
Following our service this morning, there will be a quiz on where in the sermon Rachel's story of Wendy comes true. The association between wilderness and spirituality goes back millennia. In Western traditions, leaders and prophets such as Jesus and Moses, Elijah and Mohammed left their places of origin to find their vision and inspiration in the wild. The Buddha's remote sojourn provided spiritual insights that were influential throughout the East, and ultimately became the formation of Thoreau and Emerson's transcendentalist ideas. Now, wilderness is usually identified as an area that has been largely undisturbed by human development. Wilderness often lacks roads, buildings, and artificial structures. Wilderness provides an environment for plant and animal species without interference from our humankind. So very few places on Earth are complete or pristine wilderness, but there are wilderness systems in every ecosystem and on every continent. The Great Barrier Reef in Australia, the world's largest coral reef, is an aquatic wilderness. Most of the continent of Antarctica is considered wilderness. And here in Alaska, the Noatak and Gates of the Arctic Wilderness is the largest wilderness area encompassing over 13 million acres. Other designated wilderness areas are quite small in comparison. The Ernest E. Debs Regional Park, a designated wilderness site, is located on an old ranch on the Arroyo Seco neighborhood of Los Angeles, just northeast of the densely populated urban center. One of the foremost chroniclers of humankind's relationship to wilderness, Fraser Nash, has written, "Civilization created wilderness. For nomadic hunters and gatherers, the concept of wilderness had no meaning. Everything natural was simply habitat, and people understood themselves to be part of a seamless, living community. But with the advent of herding and agriculture and permanent settlements, lines began to be drawn between what were considered safe places and what were perceived to be wild and therefore dangerous and to be avoided. In the literature of the Judeo-Christian traditions, wilderness was typically described as a barren place, devoid of human value, except in the context of spiritual purification and renewal. Nash suggests that there are over 300 references to deserts, wild places, and wilderness in the Hebrew and Christian scriptures. And considering the dry and sparsely vegetated lands of the Middle East, it's easy to understand why wilderness was never considered a particularly hospitable place. And for centuries thereafter, the biblical descriptions of wilderness as a forbidding place would have an influence on how the colonists in the New World viewed the wilderness with which they were confronted. The notion of wilderness and paradise were spiritual opposites. Over time, the Europeans, who no longer really had any real wilderness left, began to romanticize this idea of wilderness. They were not in a battle with it. Europe had long ago tamed and cultivated it. It was from this vantage point that wilderness began to be seen as something desirable. Perhaps there was yet a paradise on earth to be discovered. From the perspective, however, of the early European colonists, wilderness was a desolate, difficult battleground. Diaries from the early colonial settlers in the early days of this continent repeatedly spoke of their struggles against wilderness in militaristic terms. Their very real battle was for the day-to-day survival, and as such, wilderness was viewed as a place to be conquered, tamed, cultivated. With time, wilderness became a metaphor for the savagery within each of us. Wilderness lacked societal pressures to check the innate wildness in humankind. And without rules imposed by society, individuals in wilderness had license to behave as ever they wished. The wilderness provided the opportunity for temptation. And the understanding of wilderness underwent another change with the rise of Unitarian Universalism and Transcendentalism and the writings of Thoreau and Emerson. As an antidote to the perceived rise in American materialism, the Transcendentalists turned to wild nature, contact with which they argued invigorates and strengthens the body, inspires the imagination, energizes the mind, elevates the soul, and provides an occasion for transcending finite human consciousness. Near the end of Walden, Thoreau says, "We need the tonic of wilderness, to wade sometimes in the marshes where the bittern and the meadow hen lurk, and hear the booming of the snipe, to smell the whispering sedge where only some wilder and more solitary fowl builds her nest, and the mink crawls with its belly close to the ground. At the same time, that we are earnest to explore and learn all these things. We require that all may be mysterious and unexplorable, that land and sea be infinitely wild, unsurveyed and unfathomed by us. As Thoreau notes, we can never have enough of nature. And here, I'm sure many of us are reminded of Thoreau's well-known but oft misquoted line, "In wildness is the preservation of the world." In the 20th century, advocates like John Muir and Wallace Stegner worked tirelessly to preserve wild places. Stegner once observed that the national parks were perhaps this country's best idea ever. On another occasion, he wrote, "What I want to speak for is not so much the uses of wilderness, valuable as those are, but the wilderness idea, which is a resource of its own. Being an intangible and spiritual resource, it will seem mystical to the practical minded. But then anything that cannot be moved by a bulldozer is likely to seem mystical to the practical minded." So what can we make? What can we make of this intangible and spiritual resource that Stegner writes about? Spirituality is indeed a broad concept with room for many perspectives. In general, it includes a sense of connection to something larger than ourselves, bigger than us, and typically involves the search for meaning in our lives. And as such, it is a universal human experience, something that touches each and every one of us. People may describe a spiritual experience as sacred or transcendent, or simply a deep sense of aliveness and interconnectedness. Some may find that their spiritual life is intricately associated with their church, temple, mosque, or synagogue. Others may pray or find comfort in personal relationship with God or a higher power. And still others seek meaning through their connections to nature and art. Like your sense of purpose in life, your personal definition of spirituality can change over time. And when you look up into a beautiful starry night sky or look across a vast body of water, there is often something that overcomes us with joy and the peace of nature. Enjoying such a wonderful scene in nature evokes a sense of happiness as you connect to the universe around you. It's not too rare to be overcome with a sense of awe from absorbing the power of nature. Now, it is well known and documented that nature has a positive effect on emotional well-being and mental health. Being in nature, researchers have found, reduces anger, fear, stress, and the presence of unpleasant feelings. Exposure to nature not only makes you feel better emotionally, it contributes to your physical well-being, reducing blood pressure, heart rates, muscle tension, and the production of stress hormones. This sense of awe that happens when your senses are exposed to natural beauty is beneficial to brain and to soul. By surrounding ourselves with environmental wonders, we can improve our mental functioning and ground ourselves in our universe of well-being. Embracing a personal relationship with nature and wildness has long been a part of our Unitarian Universalist tradition. In our hymnal, you can read our seventh principle that affirms our respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are definitely a part. We affirm the spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions, which celebrate the sacred cycle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. For many years, this congregation hosted a chapter of CUPS, C-U-U-P-S, the Covenant of Unitarian Universalist Pagans. CUPS practitioners honor the goddess Gaia, the personification of the earth, as well as many other earth-centered tribal and pagan spiritual paths. And then in the 1950s, a new spiritual and nature-focused religion started to gain steam. It was known as Wicca. There we go. Someone who is a Wiccan follows a nature-oriented religion having spiritual practices derived from pre-Christian religious beliefs. While a pagan is a member of a religious, spiritual, or cultural community based on the worship of the earth and nature, Wicca is a subject that falls into a larger category of paganism. And there are many misconceptions of what it means to be a pagan, yet look at what the term truly means. Also, importantly, what it doesn't mean. Wicca and paganism are no more or less mysterious than the rest of the world's religions. And you can imagine many years ago when this congregation hosted pagan pride days, the response of our religious neighbors was not particularly warm and welcoming. But recently, two new paths of natural spirituality have come up. The first is the Japanese practice of Shinrin-yoku, which translated into English simply means forest bathing or taking in the forest atmosphere. Its first purpose is to help individuals reconnect with nature. The second purpose of Shinrin-yoku is to act as an antidote to stress and anxiety. In the 1990s, researchers in Japan began studying the physiological effects of forest bathing, providing the science to support what we innately know. Time spent immersed in nature is good for us. And forest bathing is not just for the wilderness lover. The practice can be as simple as walking in any natural environment and consciously connecting with the natural world around you. Another practice of wilderness spirituality that is gaining adherence is known as grounding, or also known as earthing. As we move through the hectic aspects of our daily lives, our connection with the earth is something that most of us simply take for granted. The feel of the sand between our toes or the sun on our skin is nice. But who really has that much time given our hectic schedules? In its most simple form, grounding can be walking around barefoot or lying in the grass outside of your house. The positive charges that naturally build up in your body interact with the negative charges naturally produced by the earth. Surprisingly, it might be worth doing this on a regular basis, establishing a time each day to really connect with nature, to really connect with the world around us. For this can be a powerful means of transforming both our mental and our physical well-being. And this connection between body and earth, this connection could be the turning point we all need to really and truly feel alive in all the things that we do each day. Again, Thoreau intuitively understood. Again, Thoreau intuitively understood the healing power of being in nature. He observed, "I think that I cannot preserve my health and spirits unless I spend 4 hours a day at least, and it's commonly more than that, sauntering through woods and over the hills and fields, absolutely free of all worldly engagements. Now, I appreciate that very few of us can probably afford the luxury of spending 4 or more days sauntering through the woods. But we can probably find time to be in a garden, to sit under a tree, to walk one of the trails at the Museum of the Shenandoah Valley, or along the banks of Abrams Creek in the campus of Shenandoah University. We should be simply, as Thoreau says, sauntering through nature, not walking from point A to B simply to add to our step count or to see if we can do the distance in less time than we did yesterday. Whether we are hiking in the remotest parts of a national park or sitting in the grove of glorious ginkgo trees at Blandy Farm, or just finding a green space near where we live, being in nature is a great cure. It cures, nurtures, and ultimately feeds our spirit and soul. And so this morning, I want to close with these wonderful words by Nancy Wood that you can find in the back of your hymnal. My help is in the mountains, where I take myself to heal the earthly wounds that people give to me. I find a rock with sun on it, a stream where the water runs gentle, the trees which one by one give me company. So I must stay a while until I have grown from the rock and the stream is running through me and I cannot tell myself from the trees. My help is in the mountain. That I take away with me.
Purpose of the church is to encourage all of those who gather to grow more generous in spirit and in action. We will now gratefully receive an offering to sustain this self-supporting church and its ministries within and beyond our walls. If you happen to be watching us online, we hope you will consider making an offering after today's service through our webpage, uushenandoah.org. And now, please stand in body or spirit as we sing hymn number 128, For All That Is Our Life. As Dixie comes forward to extinguish the flame, let us say together, here and from our homes, the words for extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of our or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again.
We receive fragments of holiness, glimpses of eternity, brief moments of insight. Let us gather them up for the precious gifts that they are, and renewed by their grace, move boldly into the unknown. Amen, and blessed be.